We are all snowflakes melting on the tongue of the universe. This is a quote by John Mark Green from one of his poems. And this is one of those quotes that has been circulating in my mind over the last several months. And essentially it's about impermanence. My father committed suicide when I was 16 years old. And at the time, it turned my whole world upside down. It was the worst possible thing that could have happened to me. But now in hindsight, here about 20 years later, which is crazy to say, I look back on that loss with an immense amount of gratitude because at a very young age, that experience put me in touch with the ephemeral nature of all things. This finitude, this physical experience that we have as human beings. And it took me down the path of asking deep spiritual existential questions like, who am I? What is existence? Why am I here? And I was fortunate to be faced with those questions at a very young age, as painful as it was, because from that experience and integrating the sudden loss of my father, it forced me to integrate how beautiful life actually is. A good example would be like a delicious piece of food. What makes the experience of a delicious piece of food so wonderful is the fact that it's temporary. It's this brief experience and then it's gone. One of the best practices that you can do is to contemplate just the ephemeral nature, the impermanence of all things. Essentially, Memento Mori, which is that stoic phrase that means, remember you will die. And this isn't meant to be negative or morbid or anything like that, although it can induce feelings of fear or melancholy or whatever it might be. I would encourage you to face these sensations, face these feelings head on. This is one of the best ways to experience a very rich human life. I understand as beings with ego, the very nature of the ego is to survive at all costs, and this can be very counterintuitive. But if you truly want to be free in this experience of life that you have, then you have to face your own death on some level. Now, this doesn't mean you have to sit in a room and just imagine yourself dying over and over again. It starts with acknowledging small deaths in your life. Eventually, we will lose everything. Think about a relationship that you're attached to. Think about some kind of material object you're attached to. Maybe it's your car, maybe it's your house. And start allowing yourself to imagine that thing disintegrating with time. And imagine it being a graceful thing. Another beautiful phrase that comes from the Japanese term monono aware. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But monono aware is essentially just that melancholic feeling that you have whenever you recognize that something is passing or something has passed. I've sometimes experienced this whenever I've moved locations. I'll look at the empty apartment or empty house that I'm in, and I'll just think of all of the experiences that I had, all the beautiful moments. And there's something beautiful in letting go of that. Being very present for those types of moments, you can eventually work your way up to things like loss, the death of a loved one. If you're watching this, then chances are you've probably experienced a deep, tragic loss of somebody you've loved at some point. And if not, I guarantee that at some point you will. And ultimately, you're going to lose everything. Sitting in this truth is actually what tends to bring people towards the path of spirituality. It starts off being interested in maybe philosophy, Carl Jung, things like that, but then eventually you start wondering, is there something beyond death? Does my consciousness continue even after this? And I know that various religions and stuff like to give you like this guaranteed answer. It's all hearsay. It's the belief someone told someone who told someone, hey, the afterlife looks like this or that. But to be honest with you, man, you've got to let that go even. You have to pursue genuine experience. Otherwise, hearsay and belief, it's not going to take you very far. What happens is your ego latches onto that, and then you start lying to yourself that you know what happens when you die. But the concept of dying before you die, it's very well known in spirituality, but essentially it's ego death. And this can be experienced through various different ways. Sometimes tragedy can trigger it. Hours of meditation, psychedelics, I think, are the most potent tool, but I know that not everyone's going to go down that path. But essentially, ego death gives you that same feeling that you would get when you're actually physically about to die. Like if you were drowning in a pool and you can feel yourself slipping away. Before every awakening that I've ever had, it has always been initiated by this feeling of death. And what a bad trip is essentially is if you're having like a mystical experience or, on psychedelics and you're suffering and you're like fearful and you're like, oh my God, this is a bad trip. It comes from your resistance to death. And I'll say that this is, of course, very natural because that survival mechanism, that fear of death, is what keeps us alive. It's what keeps us going. But it's also the same thing that prevents you from living in your highest truth. Not many people talk about this. Again, I'll say I was fortunate because coming face to face with these deep existential questions as a 16-year-old whose father randomly committed suicide out of nowhere, in hindsight, I can appreciate the ephemeral nature of everything in this life. Even this video, right? It's about to come to a close. I don't know if this video is bringing you some sense of comfort, or maybe it's even triggering anxiety inside of you, because these topics are not always easy to face. So if this kind of conversation actually brings you comfort to some degree, either A, that means you've had deep spiritual awakenings, or B, you're on the verge of some kind of profound spiritual awakening. Because liberation lies on the other side of death, either physically, okay? Death isn't real. It's an illusion. So you change form after you die, essentially. Either you're going to die physically, or you're going to have ego deaths leading up to your physical death, which strips away a lot of the fear that human beings live with. Imagine living with 80% less fear of death. What would you do? And I don't just mean physical death. I mean the death of your ideologies, the death of who you think you are, the death of what everyone in your community knows you to be, and even the death of how you view yourself. I know some of these things are really deep, mystical teachings, and some of it might go over your head, and that's okay. The biggest takeaway from this video is to allow yourself to surrender to the temporary nature of everything in this life. And it's actually what makes it beautiful. If everything was permanent, man, we wouldn't value it. I look back on the relationship with my father with so much gratitude. And the relationships that I have now, whether it's with friends or my girlfriend or clients that I interact with for a period of time, I'm able to be fully present for it and enjoy it and realize that my interaction with this other human being, this season of life, whatever it is, it's temporary. Let me be here for it. Let me be here for it fully. It's almost like if you were having a dream of some kind, whether it's a good dream or whether it's a nightmare. Once it's done, you end up thinking back like, man, that was crazy. I actually experienced that. And part of you wishes you could go back and experience it again. That's what this whole reality is. It's a very, very profound dream with all the highs and all the lows, all the beauty, all the ugliness, all of the joy, all of the melancholy. Even certain films can kind of give off that feeling of melancholy. It's like a joyful sadness, from that Japanese phrase, monono aware. And you know it when you feel it. And this is a gift, man. Allow yourself to bask in it. It's a beautiful day. I just wanted to be outside today. So I've been on this little hike and I brought my camera gear with me. And when it felt right, I turned it on and here I am speaking to you. You will notice that every spiritual teaching, regardless of the tradition or the religion, points to something like this. In Buddhism, they have that phrase, "This too shall pass." And this goes for both the positive and the seemingly negative. So if you're going through something difficult right now, if you're going through challenges, if you feel sad or depressed, or you went through some kind of recent loss, understand that that sensation, that feeling, maybe you're going through a dark night of the soul, it is going to pass at some point. And if you can stay conscious and aware, you will look back on it with immense gratitude for it. And then similarly, if you are on top of the world right now, everything's going your way, you've got the girl of your dreams, you've got tons of money in the bank, your business ideas are popping off, whatever it might be, hold on to those things loosely. Don't be so attached and clung to them like your very life and existence depends on it. Because you are so much more than those material things. Those material things are not to be demonized, they're meant to be enjoyed and appreciated. But at the end of the day, it's not who you are. So that's all I got for you today. Let me know in the comments if this resonates, if you have any thoughts on this topic, if you've gone through any experience of loss, if you've been hit with the ephemeral nature of this reality, and if that's actually been a joyful experience or a nightmare for you, or if you're in the middle of integrating that right now. Like the video if you made it this far. I do offer coaching and mentoring. If that's something you're interested in, see the link in the description. You are loved, you matter, and you've barely scratched the surface of what you're capable of. I'll talk to you soon.